This is effective project management, and now we're talking about Chapter 5, Project Management Process Groups. So there are 5 process groups associated with the scoping, planning, launching, executing and closing of a project, and there are 10 knowledge areas associated with those. And we need to map the process groups into the knowledge areas so that we understand how things hang together. So they're the 5 that I just went through: scoping, planning, launching, executing or monitoring and controlling, and the closing group. And there's a definition beside each of them there that you can read as well as I can, so I won't read through them. But every project management life cycle that we talked about in the earlier chapters has to do something in each of these process groups. Whether it's agile or traditional or extreme, it has to be done. So the scoping process group identifies the stakeholders, recruits the project manager, elicits the true needs and the high-level requirements. It documents those needs. We write a project overview statement, it's a one-page description of the project, and then we get senior management to approve that we can move on to plan in more detail how that project is going to capture that value. The planning group, we define all the work, we estimate how long, how many resources, the total cost. We sequence the work, what order it's going to be done in. We put together an initial schedule. We analyse and adjust the project schedule based on resource availability, funding availability, other external influences on the project. We figure out what their risks in the project are. We document the whole thing in the project plan, and once we've done that, we get senior management approval to launch the project. One of the things that's not listed here is we need to have some financial sense of how much the project is going to cost. And that's going to be part of the project plan as well. So then we need to launch. We've been given approval to do the project, but we don't have any people to do it yet. So we recruit the project team. We write a more detailed project description document. We establish the team operating roles and the scope change management process. We figure out how we're going to communicate within the team. We update the project schedule now that we know who's doing what. We need to know when. And then we figure out the work packages or the work breakdown structure for executing that project. Now we've started the project, we've got to do it. We figure out at the start of that monitoring and controlling section, we figure out how we're going to monitor performance and how we're going to report things. We monitor it, we monitor risk, we report status periodically to higher level management and other stakeholders. We get scope change requests and we process them and either say we're going to do them and have a project impact statement about what's going to happen to the project if we do them, or we say we're not going to do them and we give our reasons why. And all along we're going to be discovering and resolving problems. The closing group, we're just about done. We've got to get client approval to say that we're done. We've got to make sure everything's installed. We've got to finalise the project report, and then we do a post-mortem or a post-implementation audit to figure out if we could have done something better. So process groups are not a project management life cycle, right? These process groups are things that have to be done regardless of whether you're doing agile or traditional or extreme. It doesn't matter what the life cycle is. You've got to do something of all of them in every project management life cycle. Got the life cycle, and here are the knowledge areas, the things you need to be concerned with, knowing stuff about. Right? Integration, scope, time, cost, quality, human resources, communication, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. They're the 10 project management knowledge areas that you need to know something about if you're going to be a project manager. So, integration management, develop the project overview statement, the scope statement, the project plan, launch the project, monitor and control the project work, integrate the change control, and close the project. Right? You need to have a balance between understanding what the customer wants versus what they really need. And it may be problematic to be able to have those discussions with your client, but you need to have them. So how do you decide what you need to do? Right? It's an iterative process. You make somebody makes a request, you clarify the request, you give a response, you agree on the response, and maybe then you need to make another request if you don't agree on it. Once you do agree, then you can exit this cycle, negotiate the final agreement, and write the project overview statement. Once you've got the project overview statement, the next step is going to the requirements breakdown structure, or an SRS, and this is a hierarchy of goals, requirements, functions, subfunctions, and features. But there may be some unknowns, right? There may be some nebulous things happening in part of your requirements breakdown structure. So one thing people always get wrong with project management when they first start is that they think an 8-hour day is an 8-hour day. And the fact is it's not. The graph in the diagram here shows what happens when you first of all assume that your real duration is the same as the 8-hour day, right? And that's the dotted line, and you can see it goes up 2 for 2, 4 for 4, 6 for 6, 8 for 8, 10 for 10. But then the problem is people don't work 8 hours in 8 hours. They may only work 6 hours in 8 hours, and that's what the 75% efficiency rate is. Some people use 60%, some people use 80%, somewhere in that range. 75% is good. So now every person's 8-hour day only gets us 6 hours worth of progress. So that they're now progress is a slightly lower curve, as you can see on the solid thin curve on the diagram. It's labelled L equals 0.75D. And then the trouble is people get interrupted when they do stuff. They have to go to meetings. They have to go to staff meetings that are not associated with the project. People on other projects ask them for advice because they might be a subject matter expert on some particular thing. So then you've got delays, and that's what happens when the delays. So now we've gone from a 10 hours worth of work that can be done in 10 hours to 10 hours worth of work that has to be done in 20 hours. Right? So be very careful with your time management. And that's one of the things that the personnel software process, the two assignments that I'm asking you to do, that's where they come in. Right? It might help you think about your own personal way of doing things. So when you're doing estimates for duration, you need to think about what you've done in the past and how similar it is. You need to consult historical data. You need to consult experts. There's a technique that we'll go through a bit of an example on called the Delphi or wideband Delphi technique. There's another one called the 3-band technique, and we'll use those three approaches: Delphi with 3-point technique and wideband Delphi to get a task estimate or duration estimate. So cost management, there's labour rates. You could use a single labour rate. When I worked at United Technologies, the UTRC labour rate was standard across the board. It didn't matter whether you're a senior person or a junior person, you got a single labour rate. And there's capital equipment, and then there's outsourcing or contracted services that you need to cost. Quality management has several aspects. There's planning, assurance, and then control. So what's the definition of quality? Is it fit for use? Does it meet all the requirements? And is it delivered on time, within budget, and according to the specifications? Right? Is there something here that surprises you? Let's talk about it during the lecture, the class time. So process quality, the quality of project management process that produce the product service. So this is the process quality. That's how we do what we do. It's not the thing we're outputting. Product quality is the thing we're outputting, the deliverables of the project. And we probably need to be concerned with both aspects of quality. So some aspects of quality we may not be concerned with in a particular project. Are there any environmental factors? The organisational assets that we need to use, are they relevant? We probably have a project overview statement and we have a project management plan. But the quality plan says how the quality policies will be met, what metrics we're going to use to show we met them, and how we're going to fix things when they break. So quality assurance is the measurement and auditing of how we do what we do. Right? Quality audits, process analysis, project quality management tools. And then quality control is to monitor the performance, to determine compliance to quality standards, and how to eliminate non-compliance. And again, we've got these tools, templates, and processes. And you'll hear those three things: tools, templates, and processes, all the way through on each of the process groups. Right, with human resources management, we need to figure out who's in the project team, what skills and competencies they have. So this is the use of a Wysocki type approach. Who are the project stakeholders? What do they need to know? And how should their needs be met? In addition to the Wysocki, it says what are the sorts of reporting that we use. Are they emails? Are they long-form reports? Are there notifications? What are the report? What reporting do we need? Right, so there's the things. We need to make sure that the reports we make are understood, and we need to make sure that the receiver accepts them. If they don't, then we're not communicating effectively. Right, and here's the idea. So the sender generates the idea, encodes the message, transmits it through a channel. The receiver decodes the message, checks the meeting, and gives feedback. You need to get that feedback to make sure your idea got across. If you don't get that feedback, get it. If you don't get the right information coming back, then maybe you miscommunicated and you need to try again. right? And there's lots of ways you can communicate. There's conversations, meetings, email, websites, databases, memos, letters, documents, and reports. At the top, they're two-way. Down the bottom, the written ones, they're pretty much one-way, or slowly two-way. And the problem with communications is when you've got lots of people, then you've got lots of communication mechanisms. So the project manager needs to take control of that and make sure that most things flow through them. If you don't, here you've got 7 different stakeholders, and for 7 different stakeholders you've got n times n minus 1 on 2, so 7 times 6 divided by 2, so you've got 21 different connections that could happen between these 7 things. Whereas if you try and centralize things, then you've only got 6 connections that you need to worry about. It's much easier to manage than 21. So risks, the risk project, risk management has identification, assessment, mitigation, and monitoring and control, and it aims to answer all of those questions about risks. So there's different sorts of risks: technical, project management, organizational, or external. And here's a way to quantify which aspects of the scope triangle they hit. And here's a risk driver template which says various things about the risks and how we're going to deal with them. So here's a risk assessment, and a good way of displaying risks is in a chart like this, where it's a loss versus probability, and if it's in one of the red squares, then we need to take action, otherwise our project can be stopped. If it's in one of the green squares, we can probably ignore it, and we need to think about it if it's in one of the yellow squares. So here's a risk assessment worksheet where we've got all the different things we need to do and the various risk levels associated with them. And currently the risk level for this project is 71%. And you can use 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, it depends on what granularity you want or can have. Mitigation, what are the alternatives? How can you reduce the losses? And will the alternatives produce other risks? And once you've got a risk, once you've ID'd it, you give it a number, you give it a description, you assign an owner, you assign the action, and in the end you say what the outcome was. Maybe the risk didn't happen. If it's not a risk, it's an issue. A risk that happens is an issue. And here's an example log entry: ID, description, probability, impact, owner, action, and outcome. So you're almost certainly going to be buying stuff from somebody else, whether it's a software contractor or furniture or whatever it is. And you need a process for that procurement: solicitation, evaluation, selection, contract, and vendor management. It's not okay to just go out and buy stuff. You need to control what you buy, because you need to control the costs that your project is incurring. Right, so here's what you need to do for the vendor solicitation. I'm not going to read through everything, but you should look at some of the acronyms there: RBS, PMT, RFP. They're the sorts of things we need to do when we solicit a vendor. We get back responses to our RFP. We need to evaluate the vendors based on what their response was and what we know about the vendor. This might be a way to rank for vendors. It looks like number 2 is the best for the forced rank. And here we might do something else. So we select the vendor. Right, we might negotiate the final contract, or none, or one, or multiple. And we need to understand the type of contract. Is it fixed price, time and materials, retainer, cost plus? Lots of different ways we can contract. They're the sorts of things we need to talk about when we're negotiating the final contract. And there's all the other things, right? Lots and lots of detail we need to have if we're negotiating or we're contracting with a vendor. And then finally we need to negotiate or manage the vendor when they're done, and make sure when they start their work, and then we need to make sure that we monitor and control them as we go through, and close things out once they're done. And that'll include getting the deliverables from the vendor as well as paying them, making sure they're paid appropriately. So we need to manage stakeholders. They're all examples of possible stakeholders, and that's a part of the list anyway. So here's a map between the different knowledge areas in the column on the left and the different process groups across the top. Right? Integration we need to be happening in all 5 of them. In stakeholder management, we probably need to do at least the first 4, maybe the last one as well. Procurement, we don't need to do any procurement in scoping, but we do need for most of the others. And then we need to have information about all of these different management areas for planning and all of these different management knowledge areas for monitoring and controlling. Right, so we need to understand what this mapping means, right? So the integration management process group, that's holding everything together all the way through. The stakeholder management process, knowledge area is how do we elicit requirements, how do we keep our stakeholders informed, how do we keep our stakeholders happy as the project is continuing. And then different project management life cycles will use different aspects of each of these knowledge areas within each of their process groups. Agile will be a little different from traditional, and we'll talk about this during probably lecture 2. We'll see how we go. And then we can actually use all this information that we've just gone through with process groups and knowledge areas, and we can make very complicated or complex project management life cycles. Because one thing that you should realize is, just because I've said that, traditional project management does this, doesn't mean that your project has to do all of that. Maybe it has to do most of that, not this bit, and add something else because of the particular landscape that your project involves in. The thing you should get out of this course in the end is a toolbox of project management information that you should apply as you're executing projects. And once you see a problem with a project, then hopefully something that you've learned in this course will let you know, I need to do better requirements management, or I need to do better human resources management, or I need to do better change management.